The storm hit the little town of Cedar Falls just 3 days before Christmas, knocking out power, flooding streets, and canceling every church rehearsal across the county. Pastor Michael Rowan stood inside St. Harmony Church, staring at the ruined hymn sheets scattered across the wet floor. For the first time in 40 years, the town's beloved Christmas Eve service was at risk of collapsing. But amid the chaos, something strange had happened earlier that morning. An audio file appeared in his inbox from an unknown sender named L. Dela Cruz, titled simply, Pasko na naman. Pastor Rowan had almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, until curiosity forced him to press play. What followed was a melody unlike anything he had ever heard, gentle, swelling, overflowing with joy but layered with a wistfulness that tightened the chest. He played it again and again, realizing, almost fearfully, that this might be the only thing that could save Christmas in Cedar Falls. The haunting warmth of the Filipino carol echoed through the empty sanctuary as Pastor Rowan let the final note fade into the rafters. He wasn't sure what pulled him toward it so intensely. The cadence, the sincerity, or perhaps the subtle ache in the singer's voice that sounded like a prayer carried across oceans. All he knew was that this was different from the polished Western hymns they rehearsed every year. This was alive. At noon, he gathered what remained of the choir, barely 10 people after the storm scattered families across the region. They arrived bedraggled, exhausted, defeated. Yet the moment he played the carol for them, their faces lifted. No one recognized the language, but everyone recognized the feeling. "Where did you find this?" asked Maria Thompson, the choir director. Pastor Rowan hesitated. "I didn't. It found me." And although no one said it aloud, they all sensed they were stepping into something far bigger than a simple Christmas adaptation. Word spread quickly about the mysterious carol that had reinvigorated the struggling choir. Within hours, neighboring churches, also scrambling to salvage their holiday worship, began contacting Pastor Rowan, hoping to borrow whatever miracle he had stumbled upon. But he wasn't ready to share it yet. Something about the music felt personal, almost sacred. He replayed the audio, studying every swell of harmony, every delicate shift between major and minor tones, until he caught something he had missed earlier, a faint background noise. Not static, not distortion. It sounded like children singing, layered beneath the lead voice, barely audible, as if recorded in a distant room. Suddenly uneasy, he increased the volume. There was again soft, echoing, unmistakably real. But why would someone embed a second chorus beneath the main melody? The mystery deepened as he searched the email for clues, but it contained only one sentence. "If your heart is open, this will guide you." It was then he realized the sender never intended anonymity. They intended discovery. Determined to unravel the mystery, Pastor Rowan traced the email header and found it originated from a community center in Manila. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. He reached out immediately, sending a message describing the song and the unexpected emotional pull it held. Hours later, a reply arrived from a woman named Laura Dela Cruz, explaining that the recording was part of a tradition in her late grandfather's church, a modest parish known for sending Christmas blessings to Filipino migrants around the world. She had no idea how it reached him, as the file was stored among thousands of archived recordings. She insisted the children's voices he heard were from the parish orphan choir, many of whom considered music their only home. "If it brings hope to your people," she wrote, "then please use it." The message settled into him with a weight he didn't fully understand. Hope, it seemed, was traveling farther than either of them intended, crossing oceans to reach a town that desperately needed The next day, the choir rehearsed the Filipino carol for the first time. They struggled with pronunciation, rhythm, and the fluid tonal transitions that differed from Western hymns, but each mistake made them laugh instead of sigh. Something about the melody softened their frustration and reminded them of their purpose. By the fourth run-through, the sanctuary pulsed with a warm, unfamiliar resonance that made the stained glass windows shimmer. Meanwhile, outside the church, townspeople gathered to listen through the cracked doors, drawn not by curiosity, but by a sense of peace they hadn't felt since before the storm. Some cried without knowing why. Others whispered prayers. It became clear that this carol was not merely a song. It was a lifeline. The town that had felt so fractured now found itself knit together by a melody from a culture thousands of miles away. One they barely understood, yet felt inexplicably connected. 2. By evening, the storm's damage had worsened across the region. 3 major churches announced they were canceling Christmas Eve services entirely. The news shook the community deeply, but it also pushed them toward St. Harmony, the last sanctuary standing with even a partial choir. Families who had never attended the church before arrived with blankets, candles, and casseroles, offering support and asking if they could help prepare for the service. The choir rehearsed the Filipino carol for hours, each repetition blending their voices more seamlessly with the haunting beauty of the original recording. As Pastor Rowan observed them, he felt a growing conviction. This carol wasn't merely helping them survive the season, it was transforming them. And the transformation felt guided, almost orchestrated. When he finally dismissed everyone, he lingered in the sanctuary alone, staring toward the altar as the final echoes faded. He whispered into the stillness, "Why us? Why now?" But only silence, and the lingering memory of voices not their own, answered. That night, he received a phone call from the Manila parish. On the other end was an elderly man named Father Renato, who introduced himself as the former music director of the orphan choir. His voice trembled as he explained that the recording Pastor Rowan received was never meant to be distributed widely. It had been created decades earlier as part of a Christmas outreach project, performed by children who had since grown into adults navigating difficult lives. Some were overseas workers, some were displaced, and a few had passed away. Their voices were meant to be a blessing, he said softly, not forgotten. When Pastor Rowan explained how the song had revived his entire community, silence filled the line, followed by the sound of quiet weeping. Perhaps, Father Renato whispered, the children found their way to you because someone needed them again. The idea sent a shiver through him. Was it possible that music carried intentions long after the singers themselves had moved on? Meanwhile, across Cedar Falls, the Filipino carol became a quiet phenomenon. Teenagers played it on their phones. Families gathered around battery-powered radios, hoping to hear it again from the church rehearsals. Even the local news station took interest, sending a reporter to document what they called the Christmas song that saved a town. But not everyone embraced the shift. A few longtime church members felt uneasy introducing a foreign-language carol into their most cherished service. They argued it would confuse visitors or feel out of place. "We're not Filipino," one elder said sharply. "This isn't our heritage." But Maria, the choir director, stood firm. "Hope doesn't need a passport," she replied. "It just needs people willing to receive it." Though the tension simmered beneath the surface, the choir refused to abandon the song. Deep inside, each of them sensed that removing it would extinguish the fragile spark of unity that had begun to heal their fractured community. On December 23rd, the church launched its final rehearsal. The sanctuary overflowed with townspeople offering support, some holding lanterns to brighten the dim space, others helping repair damaged pews, and a few simply sitting in silence, absorbing the comfort the carol provided. As the choir began, something extraordinary happened. The children's voices, the faint chorus embedded in the original recording, seemed to blend with the live singers even more clearly than before, as though bridging the gap between past and present. Several choir members glanced around in confusion, unsure whether they were imagining it. Maria paused the rehearsal abruptly, asking if anyone else had heard it. Nearly everyone raised their hands. A chill passed through the room. Was it an audio quirk? A trick of acoustics? Or something more? Whatever the explanation, it felt as if the children from Manila had joined them, strengthening the carol with a presence none of them could articulate. Later that night, while reviewing the service program, Pastor Rowan discovered another strange detail. The recording Lara sent contained metadata showing it had been accessed multiple times over the years by internet users across different American states, small towns, rural churches, and community centers. He contacted a few of them, and to his astonishment, several reported similar experiences. They said the carol had arrived in their inboxes unexpectedly, often during times of crisis. A wildfire season, a church fire, a pastor's sudden illness. In each case, the carol became a source of unexplainable comfort. Some communities even recorded their own versions, integrating the melody into their worship permanently. It dawned on him that Cedar Falls was not the first to receive this unexpected gift, only the next in a long chain. And yet, something about their involvement felt pivotal, as if the carol's journey had been building toward this very moment. In the early hours of Christmas Eve, Pastor Rowan ventured out into the silent, frost-chilled streets. The town still bore the scars of the storm, but the atmosphere felt strangely peaceful, as though suspended between despair and renewal. He walked past shuttered shops, darkened homes, and the remnants of broken decorations scattered along sidewalks. Then he noticed something remarkable. People had begun placing small lanterns outside their houses, each one flickering softly against the night. Many lanterns bore the colors of the Philippine flag, blue, red, yellow, white, painted hurriedly onto glass jars. He stopped to admire them, overwhelmed. These weren't mere decorations. They were acknowledgments, tributes to the culture that had unknowingly lifted their spirits. Without any instruction or coordination, the town had embraced the Filipino tradition of paroles, symbolic stars of hope. It was a quiet, beautiful gesture that conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. As dawn broke, the church prepared for the largest Christmas Eve gathering in its history. Volunteers swept floors, tuned instruments, and decorated the sanctuary with candles and paper stars. Maria led the choir through one last rehearsal, this time incorporating harmonies inspired by Lara's notes about traditional Filipino arrangements. The melody now carried a depth and authenticity that made even seasoned singers teary-eyed. Yet beneath the excitement, a growing sense of anticipation pulsed through the community. No one could fully explain it, but they all felt something extraordinary was about to happen. Something beyond a simple performance. Even the skeptical elders softened, observing the unity blossoming around them. When asked whether they still objected to the foreign language carol, one elder sighed and said, "If a song brings peace to a wounded town, it belongs to all of us." It was the closest thing to an apology the choir would ever receive. While preparing his sermon, Pastor Rowan struggled to articulate the significance of what had happened. Every line he wrote felt insufficient to capture the mysterious power of the Filipino carol. His thoughts drifted back to Father Renato, to Lara, to the children whose voices had crossed continents to reach them. The more he pondered, the more he realized this wasn't just about music. It was about the transmission of hope across generations, across cultures, across grief and distance and forgotten histories. The sermon he ultimately drafted abandoned theological rhetoric and instead focused on a single truth. Sometimes salvation arrives quietly, through the unlikeliest messengers. And sometimes God speaks in words we do not understand but feel deeply. With the weight of this realization steadying him, he stepped into the sanctuary, ready to witness a moment he sensed he would remember for the rest of his life. 14. The service began under dim candlelight as the townspeople, over 600 strong, filled every pew. Families displaced by the storm stood shoulder to shoulder with lifelong residents. Some brought blankets to share, others carried lanterns or small photos of loved ones who could not attend. The atmosphere felt reverent yet electric, as though the sanctuary itself were absorbing the collective anticipation. When the first prayer concluded, the choir rose. Silence fell, crisp and immediate. The piano introduced the gentle prelude to Pasko na naman. Then slowly, the voices joined. Tentative at first, then surer, fuller, lifting into the rafters with a resonance that made several listeners clutch their chests. Even those who understood no Filipino at all recognized the emotion woven into every phrase. The melody washed over the congregation like warm light, dissolving tension, fear, and despair. Some wept openly. Some closed their eyes. Everyone felt transformed. Midway through the carol, something astonishing happened. The faint children's chorus embedded in the original recording began to echo throughout the sanctuary, not only through the speakers but seemingly through the air itself. It was louder than before, unmistakably present, harmonizing with the live choir in perfect pitch. Gasps rippled across the congregation. The choir members exchanged bewildered glances but continued singing, their voices instinctively adjusting to blend with the spectral harmonies. The effect was breathtaking, unearthly, yet profoundly peaceful. Many in the congregation felt as though they were hearing not merely a song, but a memory, one carried across oceans, resurrected through the act of communal worship. After the final note faded, silence engulfed the sanctuary before erupting into applause, tears, and embraces. The moment was unlike anything Cedar Falls had ever experienced. After the service, crowds lingered long after the candles burned low. People approached Pastor Rowan, recounting how the carol stirred memories of loved ones, healed old wounds, or renewed their faith. Several Filipino families who had settled quietly in Cedar Falls over the past decade approached him with tears in their eyes. "We never expected to hear our language here," one woman said softly. "You made us feel seen." It was only then that Rowan realized the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't merely a cultural exchange. It was a reclamation of belonging for families who had lived in the community yet never felt fully recognized. He asked them to share more Filipino carols in the coming year, and they agreed eagerly. Cedar Falls had opened its doors to a new musical heritage, and in doing so, discovered a deeper sense of unity than it had ever known. Later that evening, as most families made their way home through streets still glistening with melting snow, the choir gathered with Pastor Rowan in the sanctuary for a private reflection. They replayed the recording once more, hoping to understand what had occurred during the service. Yet this time, the embedded children's voices were faint again, barely perceptible, just as in the original file. "It wasn't the speakers," Maria whispered. "Those voices filled this room." Several choir members nodded, their faces pale with wonder. Rowan paced slowly, unable to ignore the overwhelming impression that the service had served as a bridge between two worlds, between past and present, between Filipino children who once sang with innocent devotion and a small American town healing from devastation. Whatever had happened, it had pressed on their hearts with purpose. They left the sanctuary in silence, carrying a secret they sensed would stay with them forever. Across the Pacific, in Manila, Lara received a message from the parish's old email address, one she had long since disabled. The message contained a single sentence: "They heard us." She stared at the screen, shaken. The address from which the message was sent had belonged to her grandfather, who had passed away nearly 19 years earlier. Believing it to be a glitch, she closed the laptop. But later that night, unable to sleep, she reopened the device to find another message. A recording of the Cedar Falls choir singing the carol, accompanied by an ethereal layer of children's voices, she recognized instantly. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that the song had not only traveled across the world, but had awakened a legacy her grandfather had lovingly preserved through those children. Children who had believed that their voices mattered even when life told them otherwise. The following morning, Cedar Falls awoke to national news coverage. A reporter who had attended the service uploaded a segment describing an extraordinary musical event linking two cultures through a single carol. Clips of the choir quickly went viral. Filipino viewers from around the world flooded the comment sections with stories about singing the same carol during childhood, celebrating Simbang Gabi, or remembering the joy of lantern-lit streets during December. Many expressed disbelief that an American church had embraced their traditions so wholeheartedly. The story blossomed into a nationwide conversation about cultural exchange, empathy, and the healing power of music. Soon, bishops and pastors from across the country began requesting the arrangement used by St. Harmony Church, hoping to integrate the Filipino carol into their own services. Without intending to, Cedar Falls had sparked a movement. Within days, St. Harmony's inbox overflowed with messages from American churches, urban, rural, suburban, asking for permission to perform the carol during their Christmas services. Some shared stories of congregations battered by economic hardship, fires, and even recent loss. They believed the Filipino carol might restore hope, just as it had in Cedar Falls. Others simply wanted to honor the Filipino diaspora in their communities. As Maria coordinated responses, she realized something extraordinary. These churches weren't merely adopting a new song. They were embracing a cultural story, a narrative of resilience anchored in Filipino tradition. Requests also poured in from Filipino-American groups, offering to teach pronunciation and harmonies. A collaboration unlike anything seen before in American holiday worship was forming, fueled by sincerity rather than obligation. The carol had become a cultural ambassador, carrying comfort, history, and kinship across thousands of miles. Meanwhile, the choir members struggled to reconcile the surreal attention they were receiving. Many were ordinary townspeople, teachers, mechanics, retirees, who had never imagined influencing anything beyond their quiet community. Their story was now circulating nationally, even internationally. Interviewers asked what made the carol so powerful, but no one could articulate it fully. "It felt like the song chose us," one member finally said on camera. "We didn't perform it. We experienced it." That statement ignited curiosity among journalists and scholars, prompting discussions about the spiritual nature of music and whether some songs carry collective memory within their vibrations. Though many theories emerged, the choir knew the truth was simpler. The song had arrived when they needed healing, and in singing it, they offered that healing to others. Back in Manila, Father Renato visited the old parish where the carol had first been recorded. The building was worn from decades of tropical storms, but the moment he stepped inside, he felt the echoes of children's laughter and rehearsals that had once filled the room. He approached the dusty storage cabinets where sheet music and tapes were kept. When he opened a drawer, he found something unexpected, a folder labeled, "To be shared when needed." Inside were handwritten notes by his late predecessor, the children's original choir director, describing how the carol was meant to travel far, comforting strangers they would never meet. "Music carries the prayers of those who believe," one note read. "When the world is wounded, let this be a balm." Renato realized the phenomenon in Cedar Falls was not an accident, but a fulfillment of a long-held intention, a prophecy delivered through sun. In Cedar Falls, life slowly returned to normal, but the transformation lingered. Neighborhoods that had barely interacted before the storm now worked together to rebuild damaged homes. Families gathered nightly to sing both American and Filipino carols, creating a hybrid Christmas tradition unique to their town. The Filipino families, once quiet and seldom acknowledged, were now celebrated and consulted as cultural guides. They cooked traditional dishes for community gatherings, shared stories of holidays in the Philippines, and taught children how to craft paper parole lanterns. Far from being a fleeting moment, the embrace of Filipino traditions had rewoven the town's identity, stitching a new thread of cultural appreciation into its fabric. What began as a mysterious audio file had blossomed into uni. Thai. While examining the church's sound system days after the service, a technician discovered something startling. The file containing the children's embedded chorus was completely intact. No anomalies, no evidence of alteration. Nothing could explain why the chorus had intensified so dramatically during the service. Word of this discovery spread to musicians and audio engineers nationwide, many of whom attempted to replicate the effect. None succeeded. Some proposed acoustic resonance phenomena, others theorized emotional hallucination, but none of these explanations satisfied those who had stood in the sanctuary that night. They insisted the children's voices were real, not imagined, not amplified, but present. Whether miracle or mystery, the townspeople agreed it was not theirs to dissect. Some experiences, they felt, were meant to be received, not proven. As Christmas week continued, the Filipino carol became a staple in Cedar Falls. Schools taught students simplified versions, local shops played it over portable speakers, and families hummed it while repairing roofs and clearing debris left by the storm. The song evolved from a symbol of survival into a soundtrack of renewal. It reshaped how people viewed Christmas, not as a spectacle, but as a season anchored in community and shared humanity. The more they sang it, the more they perceived layers within its melody. Joy braided with longing, faith intertwined with sorrow, a bittersweetness familiar to anyone who had ever hoped for better days. It reminded them that Christmas did not erase hardship. It illuminated the strength to endure it. Months later, in early spring, Cedar Falls received an unexpected invitation. A delegation from Manila's cultural ministry wished to visit the town to attend a joint performance of Pasko na Naman by both the American Choir and a Filipino children's ensemble. The event was proposed as a gesture of cultural friendship and gratitude. The town accepted eagerly. When the Filipino children arrived, bright-eyed, excited, nervous, the people of Cedar Falls welcomed them with warmth usually reserved for family. The children toured the town, saw the storm's lingering impact, and listened to residents describe how their culture had helped heal the community. Many of them cried, astonished that a song so familiar to them had traveled so far and mattered so deeply to strangers. The joint performance took place in the rebuilt sanctuary, now adorned with Filipino lanterns and American evergreen garlands intertwined. As the children's ensemble began their portion, many older Filipino immigrants in attendance wept, hearing echoes of home they had not experienced in decades. When the Cedar Falls Choir joined in, harmonizing across languages and cultures, the sanctuary erupted into a radiant tapestry of sound. This time, there was no mysterious amplification, no spectral chorus, only the pure, joyous blending of two communities whose lives had become unexpectedly intertwined. The applause lasted nearly 5 minutes, and by the end, both choirs stood arm in arm, grinning through tears. The event made national headlines again, but Cedar Falls no longer felt surprised by the attention. They understood that they had become part of a story far larger than themselves. A story about resilience, crossing cultures, and the unforeseen ways a simple melody can change lives. Scholars later described the Cedar Falls phenomenon as the moment American churches began incorporating Filipino carols into their worship permanently. The trend spread rapidly, especially among congregations seeking authenticity and warmth in their holiday celebrations. Far from being a novelty, Filipino Christmas music became a cherished addition to services across the United States, bridging communities that had previously known little of each other. 1 year after the storm, Pastor Rowan returned to Manila to meet Laura and Father Renato in person. They visited the old parish where the recording originated, and Rowan saw the faded room where the orphan choir had once rehearsed. He listened as Laura explained the stories of some of the children, stories of hardship, resilience, and unbroken hope. Rowan felt humbled, realizing that Cedar Falls had not simply borrowed their song. They had inherited its legacy. Before leaving, he placed a small lantern on the altar, painted with the colors of both nations. "Thank you," he whispered, not only to the people in front of him but to the unseen children whose voices continued to echo across TI. By the following Christmas, the Filipino carol had become a cornerstone of St. Harmony's annual worship. The sanctuary filled with lanterns, shared meals, and multilingual music, a testament to the bond that had reshaped their identity. As the choir began singing Pasko na naman once more, Pastor Rowan stood silently in the back, listening. No mysterious voices emerged this time, but he felt the presence of those who had sung before. The children of Manila, the families of Cedar Falls, the countless others who had embraced the carol across the nation. The story that began with a single mysterious email had grown into a movement rooted in gratitude, remembrance, and unity. And as the choir's final chord resonated through the sanctuary, Rowan knew with certainty that this was how traditions were born. Not through intention, but through the quiet, unexpected miracles that find us when we need them most.